Thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion. Can't we all get along? Getting your software to sing in sync. That is your software synchronized. We don't want your software to do in sync karaoke. No bye, 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 or anything like that. So for this panel discussion, I'm moderating. These are the stars. They are the Beyoncés. I am both the Kelly and Michelle. So I am Christian L. Harris. I'm the chair of PI NYC 2022. And I'm also a 3D lead, or technical designer, senior technical designer, 3D lead, global apparel development at Standards. They put all the words in my title. So I get to share them with you guys. So for my wonderful panelists, can you guys go ahead and introduce yourself, and we will start right here with Dwayne.
So I'm Dwayne Cato. I don't have nearly as many titles as Christian. I head up a digital innovation team for North America at PVH. My background is really more in large-scale digital transformations, really about starting in the go-to-market space. So your PLMs, your 3Ds, I've pretty much done a lot of that over the course of my career. That's me.
Thank you so much. Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Greenhouse, and I am the chair of the 3DRC Innovation Committee. And we have two work streams. We have one dedicated to digital data attribute model, and another one devoted to digital fabric interoperability. And that is what I'll probably be speaking about today. Thank you.
Awesome. And Wayne.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, my name is Wayne. Long time back, I had studied economics and I was a hedge fund analyst. So I kind of went into the industry from left field. And we built a lot of mathematical models and things along those lines. And then I spent a bunch of time in the supply chain, textile manufacturing, and then really happy to be here today. And today, I'm the solution strategist for Frontier, and then really excited to be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So, interoperability, something that we've been trying to get after in several ways for quite a long time, and we've made a lot of progress, but let's set the scene. So, where are we today as we build our solution ecosystems? What are some of the challenges and or opportunities we should be on the lookout for? And that's to anyone, whoever wants to get us started.
I'll take a shot.
Go for it.
Okay, so in my world, the way I see it is twofold. The first one is that in my world, if we think about fashion industry, design, develop, make, if let's simplify it down today, I observe a lot of application solutions from digital product creation onward, all the way to market, all the way to the consumer. That part, there's a lot of stuff going on. However, I believe there's a void kind of between the develop and make. And then we're not talking about seamless on-demand manufacturing the whole way through. But then if there could just be more solutions that bridges the gap between supply chain and the design material development process, then I think we're in a better place. That's the first tier, I would say. And then the second part, excuse me, I'll wrap up in a second. If we think about digital workflow as the internet, only having 1% of the population on the internet, you're not gonna get a lot of benefits out of it. I feel like that's very similar to what's happening in the industry right now. I mean, all the guys in PI are the elites. 1% of the industry using advanced digital workflow. How about the rest? 99% of the company, a brand that we work with, they have 500 people in their company, 20 people in 3D design, but then what about the 480 people? They're still going back to the conventional way of doing things, which is not to say it's bad, but then what happened to those 480 people? That's the big two voids that I'm seeing from my point of view.
Interesting.
Awesome. So Dwayne and Michelle, so from your perspective and what you guys are experiencing in your day-to-day, where are we now with interoperability? Where are some opportunities or some challenges that you guys have seen?
Yeah, I can speak to the fabric piece. So for 3D softwares in general, they all have their own proprietary way to test and measure fabric for physics. And if you're a company that's using multiple 3D softwares, that is a huge roadblock because you don't want to test your fabric 2 or 3 times. So that is a big roadblock that I have come encountered with, and that is actually why we formed the group Digital Fabric Interoperability.
I think from my perspective, collectively as an industry, I think we've undervalued and not given enough emphasis on data in our kind of end-to-end journeys and goals and transformation efforts. I think if I think of data, I think of it from the standpoint of what data do we have and how do we store it? What data do we need and where do we get it? And then once you have that data, the flow of that data through your ecosystem to create connected end-to-end journeys. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about solutions and the capabilities of those solutions and how they'll benefit the enterprise. But I don't think we spend enough time thinking about the flow of that data and what decisions need to be made at each point of the value chain. What data do you need to support those? So I think that would be kind of my call out there.
Awesome. So the scene is set. I feel like I'm writing a book. But you brought out data, Dwayne, and I want to sort of then bring that back with Wayne a little bit. So what are some of the benefits and added wins of complete and connected data for the truth source to the consumer?
Directed me?
It's a panel discussion.
Got it.
So,
Okay, got it. So-
I feel like both of you will probably have some things to add on this, and then we'll come back to Fabric and scoop that in.
Okay, I'll definitely take that one. I think if we stop and you think of all of the channels, if you're a big brand that you operate in, right? You have, retail. A lot of us have our own and operated websites. We have social. We're collecting a tremendous amount of data through those channels about our customers. But there's no one place that we can go to tap into that, to use it. So being able to really think about data and building a backbone for a single source of information about your customers. So if I think like direct to consumer, right? E-com, particularly have a CRM system that tells you about sales. You have a CDP system that tells you how you market to customers. If you marry that with ERP data, sales data, think of the view of the customer you have. Now, it also, in kind of mining that data, thinking about kind of, if you understand what you've marketed to your customer, you understand what your customer bought. And you're also monitoring social to understand what your customer is interested in. Think about if you then brought that back into the top of the funnel in terms of deciding what products you make, how many products you make, and who you make them for. I think you have a really powerful recipe kind of to transform the industry.
Awesome. Thank you. Did you guys have anything to add to that? It's okay, you don't have to, but thoughts? No, I'm not forcing you guys again. Because we got a little bit of time, but I can move on to the next one too. I just want to make sure everyone gets their opportunity to shine.
Sure. I would like to. I think what Dwayne said about capturing that data, and let's go meta a little bit. A lot of what we're seeing is that in order to get the right data and to exchange that data, and then to ultimately leverage that data to complete certain tasks, ultimately, there needs to be a standardization component in there, I think, and then there is a transparency in there. Therefore, the kind of data that you grab, maybe from within your organization or outside with your external partners, then you can do something with it to complete a job, whether that is digital product creation or going to market or pushing your product to your consumers directly. And I just feel like the important components are around standardization and then transparency and then accessibility. So the rest of the 480 people from your company can use that resource and then contribute and use those data to complete their tasks. That's my take.
Got it. So one of the things that I really love about this particular group of speakers is the mix of things that everyone's working on. So as we were sort of putting this panel together, Wayne and Dwayne both had like really big scope examples of how we need data to be interoperability. And then Michelle comes in so Michelle, we're coming to you, with how that's working on the ground with fabric as well. So sometimes I go to panel discussions and I was like, that was all way above my head, but I do understand fabric and it's all connected, we need all of it. So some of the discussion and just in general around interoperability, I think where we use fabrics and how it's going into our digital workflows is a great example to see some of these things come to life. So Michelle, what kind of progress have we made when it comes to integrating materials and material scanning into the digital process?
Yes, I can definitely answer that. So the 3DRC Digital Fabric Interoperability Group has published last year an SOP, or a standard operating procedure, which allows brands and retailers who have labs or labs themselves to test the fabric one time on classical testing equipment and use this fabric throughout any 3D software. So we found that to be a huge, huge win to the industry. It also helps with, as we're scaling up, as everybody is scaling up because of the pandemic, everybody doing more and more 3D, we know that the digitization process is going to move closer to the source. So if brands and retailers are working with suppliers and the suppliers has a lab in-house, they can follow the SOP and be able to output the digital fabric for any of their brands, because it could be used in Clo, Browseware, Optex, and there's more that we're working on, which I will reveal later, but that's enough for one.
Awesome. And I love that, in that, Michelle, you touched on scaling. So this is a question for any of you that, guys, I'm sure you all have thoughts on this. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. No pressure. But so scaling, once we do achieve greater interoperability, how do we scale? What are some of the things that we should keep an eye out for there? They're also polite, don't you love it?
Scaling, first of all, I think you need to target specific jobs to be done. So scaling as a in-state, I get it, but you need to target specific jobs to be done. Now, if you take as table stakes that you've digitized most of your workflows, so you have a connected ecosystem, I think it comes back to, once again, being able to leverage, and I hate to say it again, but data. Create that data backbone. Because then when you're talking about scaling, if you have that backbone of data with a connected ecosystem, then you can start to leverage things like machine learning and AI. So the balance between truly human decisions and data-driven decisions, I think, is important. I think once you achieve that balance, I think the other component of scaling that we don't talk about enough is change management. So assuming that you have a connected ecosystem, assuming that you're leveraging data, you're ultimately talking about new ways of working. So there's the component of change management that is scaling up your workforce to embrace the new way of working. And the other component of change management is there will be resistors, and you really need to bring them along for the journey, because the resistors can live at all levels of the organization. Some of them can actually cripple your objectives if you don't bring them along. So I think for me, it occurs in layers. I think the first layer is really connect as much of those journeys throughout your ecosystem as you can, typically picking those that are most critical to your business strategy as well as the performance of your business. That's table stakes. Then you're layering in kind of more data-driven informs or decisions. And then subsequently, you're actually managing that change management process to make sure that what you're proposing sticks.
So if we don't have any other thoughts on scaling, I wanted to Dwayne, you mentioned the data aspect and your objectives, but then also that transition management point. Clearly, you know how to prioritize these things very well, but what can brands do to prioritize? Like, how do you start to figure that out?
In terms of creating that connected ecosystem?
Yeah, and just in scaling and in general, and creating your connected ecosystem, there are all these components that need to happen. Are there any thoughts on how brands can prioritize and figure out where to start?
I think if we go back to the topic about trying to make everything work together, I think for prioritization, I think I would slightly change the way we discuss things like interoperability and end-to-end. Rarely in my battles to win executive sponsorship of a given project or digital transformation initiative have I called out interoperability as a key business driver. But I do prioritize, and I have called out speed to value, which is important. So from the perspective of really prioritizing, I think about this as speed to value. If I can truly demonstrate that by selecting low-lift solutions, what I call low-lift integration solutions, that integrate into our connected ecosystem, that our speed to value is something that will resonate with executives. So you really want to sit down and think about specific journeys that, once again, align to your business strategy, performance of the business, prioritize those. And if indeed they necessitate connected systems or going after connecting systems, it's simply a byproduct of the effort to really create that journey. So I don't think you go into this thinking about it from prioritizing interoperability or end-to-end per se. You really want to focus on specific jobs to be done and execute to speed to value.
Awesome. Thank you. So when we look at trying to achieve better interoperability in apparel, it always seems so daunting because there's so many different ways of working and so much different product. Like there's room for all of us in the market because we all have a slightly different way of working and create different product. But I wanted to Michelle and Wayne, for you guys, what are some examples of interoperability working well in some other industries? Like, do you pull any inspiration from those? And where are the valuable lessons for apparel to take note of, or maybe that you guys have taken note of?
I was thinking about this, and this might be an awkward thing to say, but I got the company I work for has like a portable van that will come and do a mammogram for you.
Oh.
And it's just like a separate little entity. So it's super convenient. You go get your mammogram and then you go back to work, you know? And then, 2 years later, the pandemic, the warning comes up, you need another mammogram. So, okay, sorry, it's very awkward, but it's all connected. So through the healthcare industry, all of your medical records now are starting to be interconnected. And how great is that you can start to own your own healthcare because, you already know, you don't have to say, oh, wait, no, that was 2 years ago I had that, it's already in the system. So I could go to the Mayo Clinic, or I could go to a Minute Clinic, or I could go anywhere, and it's all sort of connected. I guess that's a good example of interoperability.
No, that's a great example, and I even see where that sort of thinking, how it sort of guided some of your decision making with 3DRC and fabrics in general as well, because what you're talking about is having the option of choice. I want to be able to get the same consistent service and have my materials be accurate, whether I'm using this tool provider or that tool provider. So
Right.
I get it.
And I can talk about fabric interoperability too, but.
Awesome. Wayne, any ideas on examples where we see interoperability working well in apparel and lessons we could learn from that?
I was talking to a lady this morning, and then she used a very exciting, interesting example, the airline industry. If you want to take a flight from JFK to SFO, maybe you hop on a United and then you get on a Delta. These are two different airline carriers, but then they can work seamlessly. How do they do that? Because you go to the check-in counter, you check in your luggage, you give them your name, essentially you get a boarding pass with your critical information on there. So with that package of data, they can transfer you from, what did I say, United to Delta. I think that's a real world example of how, it ties back into that data set. And then ultimately, when you get to SFO, you use that data, this package of data. When you want to get to Arizona, it's a different package of data to achieve those purposes. And an interesting question you raised is, around scaling, I would almost think, I would flip it backwards, is that you would need to be able to scale in order to achieve interoperability. And Duane mentioned about getting work done. This lady I spoke with this morning, she mentioned, when I decide to purchase a technology investment, it's always about asking my team, what kind of solution can get their work done? 1 time, 100 times, scale it internally, externally. So when you can do a task repeatedly, then there's a chance to become interoperable with other tasks, components within your workflow. So that's kind of how I see the scaling and interoperability. That's my take.
You see how he came back to the scaling thing? When I asked him earlier, he was kind of like shy. So thanks, Wayne. Very much appreciated. It's also why I enjoy moderating panels. So we've talked about lots of different tools, and you bring up a good point, Wayne, with the airlines. They're essentially their own entity and a different thing. We all use lots of different tools within our organization. So when it comes to these off-the-shelf solutions, right, our off-the-shelf solutions that we're using as a part of our end-to-end, are the off-the-shelf solutions set up for end-to-end integration across each of our individual value chains? That was the question.
I guess I'll try this one.
You got it.
The short answer is no. But I caveat that they can be, depending on how you elect to build your tech stack. What I mean by that caveat is that you need to prioritize interoperability/integration via direct connector or API as part of your selection criteria for any new solution, right? So typically, when we're thinking about off-the-shelf solutions, we heavily skew our evaluations based on deep functionality, sometimes vendor support, sometimes security. But we drastically underestimate the time it takes to integrate that solution using our own internal resources. So I think if you look for off-the-shelf solutions, you always have to be mindful of what investments you've already made, right? Because they're not going anywhere. So when you're thinking about off-the-shelf solutions and building a tech stack, you should really prioritize just as highly as you would deep functionality. In some cases, I would give up some functionality for ease of integration, because what you're really trying to do at that point is create a connected ecosystem. Your solution that you saw that has really deep functionality and you think is going to transform your organization, if you can't integrate it, it won't get used. So for me, it always comes back to how you elect to build your tech stack. If you're only focused on functionality, that's probably going to be problematic somewhere down the road. But if you focus or give as much credence to interoperability, really low touch integration, meaning I have a direct connect. So how can I leverage that? The last point I would make here is when you're evaluating a new solution, do not discount a given vendor's strategic partnerships. Understand if they're listing as another company, as a strategic partner, get an understanding of how they integrate to that solution, because that can help you solve multiple problems. So if you're picking for PLM, but you also know that you want to start a 3D discipline, understand what types of opportunities exist between vendors, because some of these guys have really figured out that, you know what, I can no longer just stand on my solution alone when the industry is really craving interoperability.
Awesome. You just made me think about how my Marriott points can go to my United account for my miles, and I love that. But when you're dealing with software solutions as well, especially in thinking about those partnerships, those are the things that become easy wins, right? If you have a great connection between certain tools and you are in the market for that kind of tool anyway, it's always worth taking a look at. One of the things that you mentioned, Dwayne, that I want to sort of touch on and also follow up with Michelle on then is you talked about as you're trying to figure out this landscape and move forward, one of the components is trying to match your internal resources and what you can do, right, to achieve your goals. But then there are also opportunities for us to work toward those goals together. So Michelle, this is directed to you. Are there opportunities for brands to work together and improve interoperability of our tools in a pre-competitive way?
Yes. Oh, perfect. What a segue. Wow. So the 3DRC stands for 3D Retail Coalition, and we are a group of many brands and retailers who've come together to solve industry problems in a non-competitive way. And the group that I'm working with this digital fabric interoperability consists of Hugo Boss, Target, Perry Ellis, Kohl's. I'm sorry, no, not Kohl's. They're in the other data attribute group, The Gap, and Ralph Lauren. And so we all have different softwares that we use, and we all come together, but we all have this problem that we don't want to test the fabric 3 times, or we don't want to, do it over and over and over again. So we've all kind of worked together to solve this industry problem and doing some very intense work. Like we meet actually once a week, and we're a very diligent and very committed group. And we were able to create this SOP and publish it and have it now tested with a lab partner, and they've shared their successes with it. And later today, I'm actually going to unveil the digital online conversion tool that we're building out to be able to then use that data in the software of your choice. So yeah, the 3DRC has been just a really great turning point for me in my career too. It's just been a wonderful opportunity. So I would encourage anybody to talk to me about the 3DRC.
Well, and also having worked on that software side, again, we have to be kind to our solution providers because they're trying to provide solutions across so many categories. And I think with 3DRC, it's a great example of what you can achieve when you have several groups sort of working together because you can identify what are sort of the common needs without giving away your secret sauce. And then you can present those common needs to the suppliers, and that gives them some guidance because when they hear it, well, this is what denim needs for material, this is what cut and sew knit needs for materials, they don't always have the lenses and filters to get through that information. But when we have a discussion together, we can get pretty far.
Yeah, and we do include the suppliers and the software solutions as well to take their input. They don't sit in our day-to-day meetings, but they come in from time to time and share their concerns and their views, and then we share our concerns and views, and it's very collaborative.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're running down on time, and I want to give you guys a moment for if you have any final thoughts that you want to throw out there. But it's inspiring. There are great things happening. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge and information. And I've enjoyed listening to the different morsels of here's where I'm sort of thinking of this, and here's like, I see that's working really well over there, so we need to pay attention to. So before we open it up for questions, any closing thoughts, Beyonce's? Oh, good. Awesome, awesome. So any questions? Raise your hand, don't be shy. Comments, anecdotes, want to tell a story? There you go. Maddie's coming right to you with the mic.
For the 3D compatibility on the materials, I'm very excited you're going to announce something later today. I can't wait to hear what that is. But meanwhile, are we putting any pressure on the vendors themselves to make sure that they can make a file format that is compatible so that if my team creates a material and we want to do continuous improvements, we don't have to republish that material 3 and 4 times every time we make a tweak?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a great call out. We are going to unveil later an online solution but we have not solved the file format issue yet. We know that you can convert sort of like a JSON and a CSV. We're working on that solution for converting between the softwares. There are new file formats that are coming out every day, like the GLB or things like that, but there's definitely more work to be done, but we have not cracked that code. But the idea is that you can just export out the file format that you need from this online conversion tool, or all of them, really. Does that answer your question, kind of?
Stuart McCready-Stotts from Coates Digital. I have a lot of day-to-day interactive with people like Frontier and PVH, etc. One of the best-in-breed solutions, which years ago was the ideal to making sure that we could customize solutions to make sure that they satisfied and delivered against those particular challenges or problems. They also create a huge amount of silos of data. Data is everywhere, and I think one of the problems that certainly I see every day is how do we, and this is where I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts and advice on this, how do you start to consider, aligned with the process that you talked around very early on, around making sure that we want to understand how we flow that data through, but how more importantly, with the solutions that we already have and the data that they already have captured, how do you extract that, aggregate it and harmonize it so that we can expose those insights at the right time to the right people to make sure that we are not underutilizing that data because it's there, right? But the challenge is, how do you aggregate it? How do you harmonize it? And how do you drive the right insights? Do you have any thoughts or advice on how you can start to consider that?
You want that or me?
I can go ahead. That's a massively complicated question, and it's very difficult for any single brand or any retailer to know at what stage, what are the critical data for what exactly use case or application. So to be realistic, I would really say consult some of the solution providers because this value chain is getting chopped up and there's a lot of SaaS players out there. They focus in a particular area and then do very well. And I think you should listen to them and then get to know what are the important material, critical data that can take you the whole way through this end-to-end process. So that would just be my realistic advice, is that talk to these vendors. They would know what's relevant in what part of the value chain. And then perhaps through Open API, a lot of those are available nowadays. And then I think you will be able to get places.
I think I'll add a point to that. I think for me, I'm always targeting specific jobs to be done, specific outcomes. It needs to be tied to something. So what my approach would be there is to really get beyond use cases and think of journeys. Like a journey would be, I want a fully automated, connected sampling process, right? That's a journey. Now map that journey, right? And then think about at what point, at those critical points, decisions along that journey, what data do I need? So you gotta hone in on the data needed to solve the journey or to fulfill the journey that you're after. Otherwise, as I mentioned previously, we collect a lot of data, we hoard data, meaning we just have data, right? We don't know what to do with it. We don't know where it is, where it's going. For me, that progression through journey starts to give data a purpose. At a macro level, you can then start to consolidate that, bring it together to say, to fulfill this journey, I need this data. To fill this journey, I need this data. Oh, there's similarity there. Now, how do I aggregate that, segment it, tag it, so that I can use it? But it all really starts for me with what are the problems or jobs to be done, or the operational pain points that you're trying to eliminate.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Wow.
Well, that is our panel discussion, guys. I hope you have some ideas on how we can all get along and sing in sync. with your software or in your car. The NSYNC Greatest Hits album is a personal favorite.